the White Queen, the great princess of Hell's Pass, Regna, turned out to be a traitor.
That's kind of awkward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey everybody, welcome back to War Budgies, and welcome to the inaugural episode of the Hobby Chat. This is going to be an interview-style show where I try to get through some of my painting backlog while barraging my very nice guest with a bunch of questions about wargaming. And our very first guest on the Hobby Chat is the Iron Kingdom's own Lore Lord, Lord of Lore, Matt Goetz of Privateer Press. Matt, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. Our painting project today, we've got an Extreme Titan Gladiator on the desk, now with 60% more gladiator per gladiator.
The extreme kits have always been really fantastic at keeping like stacks of proofing papers down on my desk. Because I think the lightest of them probably weighs about 1,500 pounds.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I heard about them, and our local store had the Gladiator, and I wasn't sure what to expect, but he comes with a 50mm base, and I find that hilarious. His maybe two of them, one for each foot.
Yeah, like Titans have always had a little bit of a overhang issue on their bases, I guess, because of the tusks and the arms.
That's true.
And they looked at that and they're like, well, we're going to make everything about the Titan Extreme. Why not that too?
Well, it works. I've just sort of plugged him onto a display base that I think is like 5-inch square, and he still barely fits.
Yeah, I'm sure. Anyway, so let's get this rolling. Sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We are here to ramble. That's what the show's all about. Why don't you go and let the people know kind of who you are and what you do over at Privateer?
All right. I'm Matt Goetz. People who play the RPG probably have seen my name on one or two things before.
Mm-hmm.
My current title is the RPG Development Manager, which basically means like I see through the production of stuff like Requiem and Borderlands and Beyond and whatever comes next.
Cool. About how long have you been doing that?
I started with Privateer back in 2012, right after the launch of the second edition of the role-playing game.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Been working on No Quarter and the lore books, command books, and that kind of thing pretty much ever since.
Cool. So you remember some of the old magic?
Oh, yeah, definitely. If you're talking about the Full Metal Fantasy version of how spells were cast with the very similar stat line of cost and upkeep, offensive, yes, no.
Yep.
Absolutely. I've actually been adapting some of those older ones to the 5th edition format with this next round of content that we're working on at the moment.
Excellent.
Trying to remember the formula that I developed for myself of like, okay, a cost 4 spell should probably land at this or that spell level in 5e. It's all very seat of the pants in this first round until we start to get some other people's eyes on it and we start to dial in more specifically what we want out of them.
Fair enough. And for those who don't know, the Requiem launched with the Kickstarter, was it last year, I guess?
Was it? Wow.
It was either last year or earlier this year.
Time has no meaning, so yeah, I'll take your word for it.
I don't actually know things most of the time. I just live here. But we had the Borderlands and Beyond, which was the first, I guess, expansion. Be the best way to put it?
Yeah, expansion's a fair way to put it. It expands on the material in Requiem, but it also gives us the opportunity to focus our attention story-wise, like narratively, on a different part of the world. Because trying to get all of the changes, all the differences into one book would have been a monumental task for Requiem.
Yeah, I can picture that. So before we start rolling into the lore part of the chat, I wanted to ask a little bit about you.
Sure.
Sort of unravel the mystery of Matt Goetz. How did you get into the hobby, first off? If you've been working the RPG since 2012, how did you come to know this glorious hobby of wargaming?
So, wargaming, I've been wargaming different systems since I was like in middle school, right? Kind of came to it the same way everybody else did, going into a hobby shop and seeing some blister packs on the wall, buying them for, man, I think it was like $3.50 when I was first starting.
Those were the days.
Yeah, right. And, you know, it was just one of those things that I kept doing and coming back to. I moved out to an apartment for college, so I had to sell whole boxes of minis for just a couple of bucks on like a Craigslist.
Yeah.
But whenever I had a chance and some spare shelf space, I'd go and I'd pick up something else that looked cool. And that's where I first kind of encountered Warmachine, was just going into one of the local hobby shops and seeing a Warjack on the shelf. And then, I don't know, like a month or two later, I was at Emerald City Comic Con, and one of the people in Artist Alley was Brian Snowdy, who was selling some gouache paintings that he had done for some of the third edition books for Iron Kingdoms. I bought the only one I could afford. It was the gun shield concept piece that he sold. I have it around here somewhere.
Interesting.
But yeah, that's sort of was my first introduction into the world of the Iron Kingdoms and Warmachine, was seeing some blister packs and seeing some paintings and just being intrigued by the aesthetic.
Yeah, it's got a lot of punch to it, I think. The big stompy robots, the steampunk. It's a cool look.
One of the other ones that I saw really early on was the Gun Mage. It was like a Arcane Tempest Gun Mage, black and white illustration, where she had her tricorn hat. She had the Mage-Lock pistol and the big ring of runes behind her.
Mm-hmm.
And I think around that same time, I had just watched Le Pacte de Loup, the Brotherhood of the Wolf. And I don't know, it just, some wires got crossed in my head. I'm like, man, I liked that movie and I like this illustration. I should find out more about this.
Very cool. So at that point in time, were you already into writing or into RPGs?
Oh man, I've been into RPGs, God, since I first was introduced to the concept of them.
You're a man of culture, I see.
Well, it was funny too, because growing up, my family had some pretty weird ideas about what role-playing games were. I think anybody who grew up in the 80s, their families got into the whole satanic panic about D&D and role-playing games in general. So when I was growing up, I had a teacher's assistant in, like, I don't know, 5th, 6th grade, something, who saw that I was really interested in the hobby stuff, right? All the stuff that nerdy kids are into when they're in middle school. And he wound up giving me this huge stack of third-party, like, adventure modules and stuff.
Oh, wow.
That I snuck home and, like, hid under my mattress for fear of being discovered with these things. But I never had the core book. I never had, like, a player's handbook or a dungeon master's guide. So I sort of poorly reverse engineered what I thought the game's rules might have meant to look like, so that I could play with all of these modules and, like, run games out of them for my friends.
Cool. Do you think that might have influenced, like, how you build RPGs now? The fact that you started off kind of debuilding them or deconstructing them?
I think so. But I mean, when it comes to role-playing games, the real secret about them is they're always kind of secretly teaching you how to develop role-playing games. Like, anytime you build an encounter or design an NPC or create a character, you're going through that same design process after a fashion, and learning through doing how it is to make your own role-playing games, your own, like, who do you know who plays an RPG that doesn't have some sort of homebrew that they toss out there, be it a setting or like a rules alteration or whatever. Like, everybody who plays these games is doing game development themselves. It's just the nature of the beast of an RPG.
Wow, we've been at this like 5 minutes. I was not expecting to get this deep. This is awesome. That's cool. So with that in mind, how did you end up working at Privateer then?
So I was a freelancer doing work for Wizards of the Coast on 4th edition. And I was really just, I wanted to get more freelance work. So some friends and I went out to Gen Con. I don't remember, it was maybe Gen Con 2010, Gen Con 2011. And we were just going around the show floor, checking everything out. And I don't know if you've ever seen the Privateer booth at Gen Con, but it's like this big display, half scale warjack at the corner, big beautiful art on banners.
Wow.
So I went up and I was talking to some people. I wound up talking to Aaron Rudell, the at the time editor-in-chief of No Quarter.
Right.
And he was very friendly. We were just chit-chatting. He's like, "So what does he do?" I'm like, "Oh, I work at UPS, but I also freelance. I write and did some stuff for fourth edition." He's like, "Oh, hey, me too. We should chat." So for a little while after that, he and I were just, talking through some freelance designs that we were working on for D&D 4E. I'd give him suggestions, he'd give me suggestions. Eventually he got back to me with "Hey, I've got some freelance work for the RPG in the magazine. You interested?" I'm like, "Yeah, absolutely." And then after my first contribution to No Quarter, Aaron hit me up again and he's like, "Hey, there's going to be a job posting and you should apply for it." So that's how I got started actually working with Privateer directly, working for them.
Cool. Do you remember what the first thing was you made for him?
Yeah, No Quarter number 45, the Foundry Forge and Crucible Tools of the Trade article.
Nice.
Oh, yeah.
Now I got homework.
It was just a list of items, weapons that were based on tools set in the IK. And, because I had sort of these dipped points of contact with the setting for so long, I was already kind of familiar with the technology of it and some of the history-based influences around, the tech level of, say, Signar and Khador and stuff.
Right.
So I was able to dive into research, looking up old, unusual tools that were used in the real world and adapting some of those, and drawing from more esoteric history for things like the Rockbreaker spray, which was based on Hannibal's march over the Alps and how they broke up limestone to get the elephants down when they were attacking Rome, stuff like that.
Some heavy research.
It's fun. I enjoy doing it.
Good. That probably helps.
I mean, anytime you can sneakily reference Carthage in the IK, it's going to be a good day for me.
Seems
I
appropriate.
love dropping. Sorry.
Seems appropriate. I'm painting up a giant battle elephant while we're having this conversation.
Yeah, right. But I love dropping weird little references in when I'm working, like minor pop culture references or in jokes for people around the office or friends of mine. One of the D&D books I wrote, I had to write an art brief for an NPC, and I basically gave them a brief description of my buddy Phil, and then I said, but he's going to have an opponent who looks like a hybrid of these two, and I think it was a picture of Montgomery Burns and Bill Nighy from Shaun of the Dead.
Yeah.
And the illustration I got was exactly that. It was Bill Nighy as Montgomery Burns. It was great.
So I will understand if you can't answer this, but are there any jokes or references you put in that no one's picked up on yet?
Oh, man, yes. And I can't say. It's
That's understandable.
It is an in-joke that came about at Gen Con, I want to say 2014. And it's made its way into 3 or 4 different things throughout the Iron Kingdom's Warmachine and Hordes.
And nobody knows yet.
I would be amazed if somebody picked up on it.
All right. Well, so before we move on from that, what do you personally, I assume you have an army or 7 like most of us?
Yeah. Looking around the room here, I've got more than a couple of things.
Is there a favorite, or are you supposed to stay unbiased as a writer?
I mean, everybody has their preferences, even if you're trying to be unbiased, right?
Oh, yeah.
I will say that I really enjoy Khador and Circle, both.
It's an interesting combination.
Yeah, I mean, couldn't have more different play styles, but
yeah,
I'm garbage with both of them, so it doesn't really matter.
I'm
Um,
right there with you.
but I also really enjoy writing for both of those factions. I enjoy writing for Khador. Some of the pieces, my favorite pieces that I've written have been for Khador, and I also really like writing for the Circle.
I don't think I've read a lot of Circle yet. As some of the
Mhm.
viewers probably already know, I am still very new to Warmachine Lore, which is one of the reasons I'm really glad that you agreed to do the show.
Yeah,
Because it's a hell of a world that's built over for the past.
20 plus years.
I'm trying to do the math and don't even know the dates. It's been a long time.
Yeah, yeah,
Very
absolutely.
impressive. So with that, actually, that's a perfect segue. We're going to play a hypothetical called Wish List.
Hmm.
So hypothetically, you have kidnapped Matt Wilson. You have tied him up and put him in the trunk of a 1963 Chevy Camaro. And while
Okay.
he's getting out of that one, you can add one thing of your choice to either the Iron Kingdoms or Warmachine or whatever. You get control of his computer for about the 6 minutes it'll take him to get out.
Right. Well, because I'm in a position to add things to the RPG, I'm going to add something to Warmachine,
Okay.
and it would be either, it's breaking my heart to have to decide, but either an Ord subfaction or a Lael subfaction.
Oh,
Like, I would love to have like the the Ordic military represented on the table, even if it was just a full-on merc thing, but
right.
having the army of the broken sword with sculpted model banners of the broken sword of Ord. It's just it's something that I've wanted for so long.
Gotcha. That's a solid answer. I like that. I'm not saying you thought about kidnapping Matt Wilson, but if you did, now you know what to do.
Yeah, exactly.
So is there anything you have a particular fondness for that you have added to Warmachine?
Well, the Grimkin book, honestly. It wasn't just me, it was a huge dedicated team of people, but it was great because we got to have illustrators and graphic designers and writers just cut loose on that. And the faction book is so unlike everything else that had been done for one of these faction books before that it stands alone and apart for how you approach the lore, with a little bit more of like a diegetic feeling toward the aesthetics and the ethos and the character of that faction.
Gotcha. What was, because I've always been kind of curious. I have a good friend of mine who's super into Grimkin. I've picked up a few of the models from the mystery boxes.
Mhm.
What was the original sales pitch of this faction like? Because it is weird.
Yeah, trying to remember. It's been years. Or Jason Souls and Matt Wilson sat me down when they approached me about being the lead writer on that book, and I, God, I might be inventing this whole cloth because it's been so long, but I think the pitch was, it's an army of twisted fairy tales and nightmares, and from that we sort of used it as a way to examine like some of the cultural assumptions in the Iron Kingdoms, because it's not just our fairy tales. It's not Grimm's fairy tales. It's
Right.
IK fairy tales, right? So drawing on kind of their fears and their cautionary tales and stuff like that.
Mm. Wow.
I mean,
Well,
if you want to get deep into it, there's a section in the Grimkin Command book that is a visual joke referencing Carl Jung's Red Book, right? Uh, there was a lot of like philosophy that went into it, just in the research side. I don't know if it necessarily translates to weird children's rhymes on the page, but trying to figure out how the personal philosophy of the Defiers would grok in the world, because I don't think many people at Privateer would consider themselves big supporters of the Jean-Jacques Rousseau model of the state of nature of man, Anglo philosophy, but that's what we kind of adapted for the perspective of the Defiers and
okay.
why they decided that all the gifts of Nenoth were such BS, because they were uh, they were approaching it from the perspective of that Rousseau style philosophy.
Man, I'm getting all sorts of homework. This is awesome. I got to read more.
I recommend everybody read more, man. I make
True
words for a
enough.
living, so more people reading, happier I am.
Point taken. Well, let me kind of segue into kind of why we're here, which is the Hinchhold scrolls.
Hmm.
Scroll or scrolls? I forget which one.
I think it's Scroll.
I think
He's only carrying the one big one.
you would know better than I would, honestly. That's been kind of the last major event I can remember that we've seen in the Warmachine lore so far.
Sure.
And then we've got a bit of a time jump, and now we're seeing Requiem and stuff coming out for the RPG, and it's some amount of time later. And I kind of wanted to get you to talk about who made all this mess and how did we get here. So,
I mean, are we talking in setting who made all this mess? Because
yes,
there's a strong argument to say that Thamar did, but
but
in setting. So
yes,
like those of us who've read Oblivion and have followed through on Henchhold, we know that the Infernal Invasion was a response to the gift of magic with Thamar.
mm-hmm.
Thamar, I mean, you could take it back a step and blame everything on the Orgoth, but that's the easy way out. So during the Orgoth occupation, when Imran was just being trounced by the occupiers, Thamar needed a weapon to help preserve, basically overthrow the occupiers. And her means of doing so was acquiring the gift of magic for humanity through a deal with the Infernals that ultimately led to the claiming in Oblivion.
Okay.
But a portion of the blame also has to be laid at the feet of the Old Witch and the Grimkin, the Wicked Harvest, because that was the Old Witch of Kador knowing that the Infernals were coming, like knowing that they were just building strength and preparing for invasion and trying to figure out, what is a way that humanity is not ultimately destroyed.
Okay.
And her method was a chemotherapy of sorts, a very painful and very difficult process of medicine wherein she unleashed the Wicked Harvest onto Cain from Urcain and set them out to punish the wicked. And like their definition of what's wicked and what isn't gets a little fuzzy sometimes.
Yeah.
But she knew that in that wild covert of murder and slaughter that the Defiers and the Grimkin would catch some of the Infernal's important allies in their nets.
Oh.
It would weaken their presence on Cain right now, and rather than risk having to start all over again and wait another several centuries, she was basically trying to force their hand and force the Infernals to act to launch their invasion before they were at their final, completely undefeatable strength.
That is a
And
bold play.
yeah, I mean, Old Witch of Kador is all about bold plays. It's not everybody who turns their light warjack into a colossal house orrery armillary sphere thing.
Wow. Okay, so that's kind of how we ended up with a whole mess of Infernals in our backyard wanting a bunch of our souls.
Mm-hmm.
So, without getting into possible spoilers for how Hingehold really ended, let's jump ahead to Requiem.
Okay.
So, it's been X number of years later, 10 years?
It's 5 years, I believe.
5 years later. And things are maybe not great, but kind of okay, is what I'm gathering.
Yeah. I would say that things are better than they were during the claiming, for sure.
Fair.
But the entire world very narrowly dodged a bullet with the claiming and with the Infernals, very narrowly.
Right.
Like so narrowly that a statistically significant portion of the population decided to go to space instead of sticking around. So it's got to mean something.
Right.
But so there are people who won in the aftermath, who benefited ultimately. Like Lael, for instance, is no longer a divided nation. It is now once again under the rulership of one of the Demartin dynasty. And Signar is in a better place than it's been for a while because Crix isn't actively pressuring its shores, and Kador has pulled back away from the border somewhat.
Mm.
Ord is going strong right now because of political allegiances with Lael, with the marriage between one of King Baird's grandchildren and Caitlin. But then you've got the people who aren't doing so hot, right? The Protectorate is not in a good place and
Yeah.
might be on its last legs. Maybe there'll be another like turn of fate for it in the near future, but right now the Protectorate is in a tough spot.
Mm.
Um, a major portion of its population left Imran completely and founded New Ichthyr and Zoo. There was a schism at the highest levels of rulership within the military government, at least,
Yes.
with Fiora and I was almost said Severius, but
It might as well have been.
it basically.
Yeah.
But between like the Flame Guard and the Scrutators, you've got this sharp divide now, with Krios on one side and Fiora kind of on the other, and the Synod being this theocratic government body that their corruptibility has been shown kind of in the full public view,
Mhm.
as the heroes of this nation have been battling against one another. And then you've got Kador, which is also not in the best spot at the moment. Like there were some pretty highly placed infernalist traders among their ranks. Their campaign of conquest and reclaiming the hereditary lands that they believe are owed to them was forestalled by the claiming. The crown prince was slaughtered, or
I
not
was going to
slaughtered,
say.
but was killed on the battlefield of Henjold. So the world's in sort of an evolving place right now where people kind of shake out where exactly they stand at the moment and what their next steps are and what are they going to do. Like, is Signar or Ord or Lael going to become a new conquering nation? Like, it's all kind of on the table at the moment.
I will say, I have to give you guys major kudos for killing off Vlad because I did not see that crap coming.
That was me, and Vlad was my very first Warcaster.
Really?
Like, yeah, oh man, I've written fiction for him in a number of different places, and I was the one who wrote that scene. I wouldn't let anybody else write it.
I was going
But
to say that's either really inspiring or kind of heartbreaking.
I, that's the thing about writing for characters that you're really invested in, right? Sometimes you see the way their story goes, and you know that you're going to have to put them on the shelf, but you know that that's what you have to do. That's what you have to write for that moment, for that beat, for that emotional resonance.
Yeah.
So it was delightful to be able to have the chance to write it. I'll say that.
No, my compliments to you for that because that one caught me off guard.
I really hope that people were caught off guard by that and by the Karchev strafing run. Those are my oh man, there were so many moments in Henjold I enjoyed writing. The Hexeris Gorshade, the Broshade moments
Hmm.
in between the Scorn and Ios, I loved. I like Morgul is another character that has I have a soft spot for. So writing him, pulling basically slipping an Infernal a Mickey, like
Yeah.
that was a lot of fun.
No, I will say the very first time that I read the summaries of the scrolls was I was trying to get into the lore and asked a friend of mine, and he sent me a link to that. So I had no idea who any of these people were.
Hmm.
The only thing I knew was that Karchev knew how to enter a room.
Oh yeah, yeah. Karchev is a lot of fun because he's just this old man fueled only by hate and a steam boiler who just wants to lay into the enemy of his nation.
And who can blame him, really?
Right.
So there was one group you didn't mention that I kind of asked about, the Infernals. Are
Yeah.
they gone? Are they still here?
Oh, they're never gone. They're never going to be fully gone. Like, there's a reason we have stats for curators and infernal horrors and stuff like that in the Monsternomicon.
Mhm.
The Infernals offer people power. they they offer people what those people want. It's the Robert Johnson, Tommy Johnson, they both have been attributed with this, but like going down to the crossroads to sell your soul to learn how to play the guitar, right?
Yep.
There's always going to be people willing to sacrifice their soul or someone else's soul uh, in order to gain temporary unearned power or influence or ability or whatever. Like human hubris and greed is going to make sure that the infernals are never fully truly gone.
Hmm. So I'm hesitant to say that the claiming has been turned back, but I'll hesitantly call it a win because I feel like it ended and we hadn't paid up what we owed.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, it also left it left some of the infernal masters in a compromised position too. Like
Oh yeah.
in the Henchhold Scroll, Zadaroth had to go talk to basically her boss's bosses in order to get more souls to empower her forces on the battlefield there. And they're
Right.
like, okay, we'll give you a loan, but if this doesn't pay out, then we're going to take it out on you. And as Requiem proves, it didn't pay out the way she was hoping it would.
Right.
So she's in a dangerous place. Omodamos is in a risky place, especially if you've played through the Legend of the Witchfire. And Agathon, like, they have had to flee Hexeris and Gorshade, uniting the sciences of House of Vire and the Mortithurgy of the Scorn against them. So, like, all three of the Infernal Masters are either in a compromised position or a desperate position. And on the tabletop, when you're bringing them to battle, I hope that your dice roll better for you because they could definitely use a turn of good luck.
Yeah. So last question with that though. Obviously, the whole complex owing of the dead and the souls and all that, and I'm sure we were racking up some ridiculous APR interest the whole time.
Yeah.
Is the debt gone? Like, do they decide to just call it even?
Oh, I don't know about that. Like, they're bound by contracts and laws, right?
Mhm.
But I imagine that they're very, very good lawyers, and there has to be something about like the terms of payment only being satisfied when 2/3 of the souls of humanity are in their possession. So I don't I don't think they're going to give up on that just because
Fair
we
enough.
we beat them up on a field somewhere.
Gotcha. So they're probably going to be sticking around for various nefarious reasons.
Oh yeah, anytime you have some greedy dude with a basement that he can start carving runes into, you're going to have an infernal cult.
Yeah. Cool. Well, the main thing I kind of want to skim through, if you had any thoughts, you kind of touched on a little bit the different factions, kind of where they stand now.
Mhm.
Just kind of wanted to run through a few of them, get your thoughts as far as not necessarily did they win or lose out of Oblivion, but how screwed or how healed are they at this point? I
Sure.
mean, down the road 5 years. And I'm going to start with the Protectorate because it's my faction, it's the one I'm closest to,
Mhm.
and hashtag Fiora lives. That's a thing. I've been in several conversations, very polite conversations with people about that. The showdown between Fiora and Krios ends with Pyrrhus throwing a spear at her head, as far as we know,
Mhm.
and that's the last we've heard of her.
Mhm. That's
So
correct. Yep.
yeah, the Protector really went through the ringer in freaking Oblivion.
Yeah.
So
Well, and that started even before Oblivion. If you've read Godless, the novel that my buddy Oren wrote about Tristan,
okay,
like it started back then. You can even say it started further back from that because when you have faith and government tied up together like that, you're bound to have these simmering background kind of rivalries and hostilities that begin building. And when on the face you have this infallible government because it's your theocracy, you can't question that. And then you start seeing those people fall, you see them fail. Like
mhm,
it undermines not only people's faith in their government, but faith in their religious structure as well. So you could go as far back as the invasion of Seoul, right?
Yeah.
And the hierarch going against the word of the harbinger and winding up getting killed for it. Um, like that is maybe one of the first fractures that happened within the protectorate that managed to force things open so much. And when you have people who are ambitious, like I'm not even going to say that Fiora was in the wrong. I'm just
Oh,
going to
no.
say she was ambitious. She wanted power. She believed that she should be the one to wield it.
She had a plan.
But yeah, exactly. But her pursuit of that power ultimately leads her into conflict with other elements of the protectorate. And when you have your leadership grinding against one another and butting heads and undermining each other, it's going to have that trickle down effect. And because it's both social and religious at the same time, it just amplifies that effect over and over.
Yeah.
And the novel Godless goes into some of that from the perspective of a person who starts as a true believer. You know, Tristan was a convert and he's got that whole faith of the converted. But a true believer who starts to have his doubts, which are fueled further by his ability to receive visions. His true sight on the tabletop is a reflection of his true sight in fiction. His ability to see these glimpses, these almost uninterpretable symbols of future events.
Okay.
But as far as the Protectorate itself goes, I mean, you'll probably see some more interesting stuff about them in the near future, at least from the RPG side of things. Fingers
Okay.
crossed.
Fingers crossed indeed. Huh. I guess we'll have to wait to find out how that duel in the streets went for a later date.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And, you know, what the aftermath of that is. Like, just because the story ends at a particular point doesn't mean the story ends, right? It's going to unfurl out with its own consequences and its own dramatic shifts.
Yep. Okay. So that's kind of where the Protectorate's hanging out. What about I'm not going to say our favorite, but the Kingdom of Signar? Winner or loser?
I would say they came out on top after the events of the claiming. Like, that's not to say they didn't suffer. Everybody suffered. Like,
Right.
whole cities worth of people suffered. But they managed to recoup their losses fairly efficiently. There's definitely a bit of a trouble in the court because Caitlin decided that now Julius is not going to be in charge of her kingdom and Signar as well. So he
Right.
needed to marry into the Signar nobility, pardon me. And there's a new plague in the Midlands that's beginning to spread that is, I would call, a matter of concern. But as far as like the overall state of society, I'd say, yeah, Signar has managed to come out of this one kind of the way that Signar always does, right? Like,
Right.
you you almost want to see him bleed just a little bit more for that one moment if you're a Khador player like some of us. But
Well, I
no, they're
mean, after Striker, I feel like they probably earned a break.
maybe Stryker going down in the battle over Merowyn was a big military loss. He was a strategic asset.
Mhm.
Um, we know that Haley is not a contributing member of the Signarin army at this point. We know that
That was
Nemo probably isn't a contributing member of the Signarin army at this point.
very diplomatically phrased.
Yeah, I'm,
Yeah.
I'm diplomacy. It's what we do. But no, so some of their biggest, most, I almost say notorious warcasters are not around anymore in one way or another.
Yeah.
And because of that, it's time for new faces and new heroes to rise in Signar.
That sounds ominous and kind of exciting.
Ominous and exciting.
Yeah. But that also
The,
gives
the,
people a lot of leeway in Requiem, since
oh,
Signar's kind of
absolutely.
looking for heroes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. Okay. Well, let's touch on one of your old classic favorites. How'd Kador turn out?
Uh, Kador's had better days.
Yeah.
Like the White Queen, the great princess of Hell's Pass, Regna, turned out to be a traitor,
Yeah.
and
That's awkward.
what's that?
That's kind of awkward.
Yeah, absolutely. And she was positioned such that she was able to allow a very large influx of infernals into Kador. And while that was going on, like Kador was defending some of its civilian population that were headed to Hengehold to get off of Kane. Because when this was happening, you have to remember the Iron Kingdoms didn't know that they were going to make it out of this.
Yeah.
Like these were the lifeboats from a sinking ship, as far as they were concerned. These were if they were going to be destroyed, they knew humanity wouldn't be destroyed if it could make its way beyond the Celestial Gate at Hengehold. So they invested a lot of military assets to protect those people. I mean, they had one of their sky ships. They had uh, Sorsha on the battlefield there.
That was an amazing scene, by the way.
Thanks. But because of that, they left the interior a little bit vulnerable, and Regna capitalized on that vulnerability.
Yeah.
They also, like, there are large swaths of Kador that are considerably more rural compared to Signar. Some territories that are considerably more like inimical. My mouth can't pronounce a word right now. that are less hospitable to population, more difficult to traverse. So I imagine that there were whole communities that were just completely wiped out by infernals before word had even reached them that something was going wrong. Right.
Yeah.
So Kador is on currently shakier footing, with Empress Einvanar being the way she is. You know that she's going to be building towards some cunning strategic move in the near future, because she's never going to sit on her laurels and be like, "Well, this is my fate. I guess I'll just go lay down." No, she's planning things.
That's not Kador at all.
Yeah, exactly. This lady let half of her country freeze for the fuel for the conquests and victors. Like she's not going to take this one sitting down.
Good on her.
And if Vastavia is still alive, you know that he's, just helping scheme right alongside her. Well, scheme is an unfair term, but plot.
Make numerous preparations.
Yeah, exactly.
There you go. Cool. See who else we got on the docket for here. Oh yeah, the other slimier, ickier empire. What's going on with Crix?
Oh, Crix, man. Crix is going to be very interesting. I'll say that. Because one of their schemers in chief is Fixius, is no longer an Iron Lich, for one. And it's kind of hard to call yourself a Lich Lord if you're not a Lich. We know that Toruk, he made some gains, but he also made some losses in the Dragon War, where
Right.
all of his kids kind of collectively tried to beat him up, and he beat them up. And we're talking injuries from fellow dragons, the kinds of injuries that left Pyromalfic hiding underneath the Castle of the Keys for many centuries. Not that Toruk was ever like frequently seen stomping around, but I'd say that there's a conspicuous amount of quiet coming out of the Church of the Dragonfather in Skell.
Okay.
That doesn't mean that Crix is in recovery mode either, right? For most of its existence, Crix has not been one for those big invasions and for constructing massive necrofactoriums on the mainland. That's not really how they normally operate. Normally, they would operate very stealthily, very cunningly, infiltrating under cover of darkness and blackmailing and bribing people in the mainland to allow them to smuggle themselves in.
Right.
much more nefarious approach to things. And if the people of the Iron Kingdoms are smart, they'll realize that, just because there haven't been major landings for a bit doesn't mean that Crix isn't up to something. Because Crix is always up to something.
Right. Not always doing business, but they're always open.
Exactly. And because so many of them are undead, and because they have an immortal, eternal dragon as the head of state, like, they can plan on timelines which are much, much longer than any other nation.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you might see Crixian agents that are trying to seed conflict between other mainland groups that will eventually flourish into wars, not because there's any immediate gain there, but because they want a battle to happen on a very specific part of land so that they can come back in a century or two and harvest necrotite out of the ground because of all the pain and blood and suffering that happened there. When you're talking about things that don't die of natural causes, they have the flexibility to really perfect their long-term plots. And a lot of what Crix has been doing in the interim between Hengehold and now is likely a return to that methodology.
Okay. So speaking of Asphyxius, something I've been kind of wondering, obviously he reappeared during Hengehold, rocking kind of a new look, something unusual for him, maybe some new friends. Is that a way to gain or lose credibility in Crix?
Rocking a new body?
Rocking a body courtesy of his new friends.
That's an interesting question. But I mean, the convergence of Cirrus, who made him his new body, was also kind of, well, not even kind of, it was, I can't believe I'm having trouble with her name right now. The Newman of Necrogenesis.
Okay.
Hold on. I was just talking about her earlier today, too. Mortenebra. Mortenebra was originally a Cyricist herself and was influential, pivotal, really, in the Clockwork Ascension. So I don't know if him showing up with, like, the shiny chrome job is going to be too big of an issue for his fellow Crixians. They might like rib him about it a little bit because he's not wearing black iron, but it's not too huge of a deal.
Okay. It's one of those kind of curious things I was wondering about throughout the days. So the last one I want to touch on, I mean, we're coming up on an hour, and I don't want to hold you for too long. I'd actually love to get you back on for a Horde episode sometime, since we're doing mostly Warmachine factions on this chat.
Oh, sure. I was actually wondering about that.
Yeah. Some various individuals I hang out with would be very cross with me if I didn't ask about the Iosians.
Ios.
Yes.
I mean, have these people read Borderlands and Beyond? Because we do cover a lot of what's going on with them there.
Not yet.
Okay, fair enough. Well, I would say that Ios is more on the Protectorate / Khador side of things post Oblivion. They have actually made some gains, territorial gains. They renewed conflict with the Scorn and were victorious in pushing the Scorn all the way back across the Abyss. It's actually Iosans who now occupy the Abyssal Fortress.
It's a change of management.
Oh, absolutely. But I mean, Venter was in charge there before, and then Makita, and now Ios. It's sort of like a rotating managerial position there. They've also started to explore some areas that were once part of the Lyosan Empire before the Cataclysm.
Wow.
Areas that the gods themselves were like, hey, maybe chill it on the lost forest of Rioles. Maybe just don't go poking around in our stuff.
Yeah.
But there have internally also been some major upheavals about what the population of Ios itself looks like. If you've been on any of the Discord or Facebook groups, I bet you know what I'm talking about.
Not particularly. I'm still catching up on a lot of stuff.
Oh, fair enough. The gods are dead, and the population within the borders of Ios are now either soulless or undead,
Oh my
like
god.
eldritch. The people of Ios are now kind of shaking out what that means. Like, it sort of recontextualizes most of their experience when you're either without a soul or no longer alive. But that's not to say that the Iosans are gone or the retribution is gone. There's large colonies of them in places like Frostbracken and around the former Scorn holdings and the Bloodstone Marches at the Abyssal Fortress,
Right.
and even more scattered among enclaves throughout the human nations of the Iron Kingdoms. They're still there. They and the Nis both are still there.
Okay.
It's just the old stomping grounds have new management signs out.
So would you characterize them as winner or loser in this one?
Oh, it depends on who you're talking about. I would say that it's mixed for Ios. Ios is in a mixed position right now.
We'll mark them down as a draw.
Yeah. Win some, lose some.
Win some, you lose some. Well said. Wow. So yeah, everything's kind of a mess, but it's honestly, that is a fantastic setting to jump an RPG into. Because that's just opportunity.
Drama arises from conflict, right?
Right.
And conflict doesn't just have to be armies meeting each other in trench warfare in the Thornwood Forest. It can take many different forms. And where we are right now, there's opportunity for a wide variety of different forms of conflicts.
So with that, obviously the Iron Kingdoms have been known for basically as long as they've been around, have been defined by the conflicts between one nation and another. And now we've got this threat that's kind of come. I'm not going to say it's gone, but it's mostly past. That threatened everyone, and everyone kind of had to get together. Is there any kind of like a lasting truce or a cautious peace or anything? Like, what's the general atmosphere like?
Even if there were a cautious peace or a lasting truce, like on the national level, you can certainly have that, but there will be clashes. There will be fights. Like in the fiction, there was something called the Coin War, where Signar and Kador and Ord were all at peace with one another, so they just started hiring a bunch of mercenaries to fight proxy wars for them. Right. That's one thing about the people of Immoren. Like, even when they're at peace, they're not that peaceful.
Well said. I like that. And that's probably honestly the perfect note to close us out on.
Sure. Works for me.
Yeah, that was fantastic. We got to taste the Requiem playset a little bit down at Warfare Weekend.
Yeah, that was fun.
It was a phenomenal game. I really enjoyed that. Hopefully we'll get a Requiem hard copy early next year, murky time frame, and we can get a lot more people into have a lot more content for it in mind for the channel once the books come out. It's going to be a good time.
Excellent.
So first off, Matt, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Viewers, hop in the comment section. Tell Matt thank you. Anything you want to see on the next episode, or if you want to get Matt back for more Hordes content, by all means, chime in. Otherwise, I got very little work done on my thing because I've had a bird on my hand the whole time, but that's okay. That's my life these days. Otherwise, this is John from More Budgies. This is Kit from More Budgies and Matt Goetz from Privateer Press, and we are signing out. Thanks for watching.